Hi, welcome back. In this video, we're going to go over lifecycle functions. All right, so what are lifecycle functions? These are functions that trigger on lifecycle events. The next question is, what are lifecycle events? So lifecycle events are basically events or different states of our application. So you can think of it as when the application loads, when the application is closed, when data in the application changes, when a page loads, and when the page is closed. All right. I'm currently in the app builder. To interact with the lifecycle functions, all you need to do is just go into the functions tab. So the first tab within the functions tab is the lifecycle functions. Here you can see all the lifecycle functions that apply to the application. So there are currently 5. So pre-rendered data is going to run on the server side before the application is rendered. App load is going to run whenever the application loads. App close is going to run whenever the application closes. App data change will trigger whenever a specific field that you're listening for changes. And the router change is going to trigger whenever the router changes. Now, if we go into a page's scope and we scroll all the way to the bottom, there are also lifecycle functions that are native to the page. So in this case, it will be page load and page close. So one of the primary use cases for lifecycle functions is basically to manage or clean states. So for example, if you were to load a page, you might want to maybe, if the page had a filter or like a search functionality, you might want to initialize the search or initialize the search parameters, right? You might have a page that has a table that makes a query to a backend and gets some data. Well, when you leave the page and when the page is closed, you might want to clean up the data. So you would have a lifecycle function that triggers on page close. And perhaps the logic in this function will simply just wipe out or reset data in our application state to, let's say, a default or empty state. All right, so enough talking, let's work with an example. All right, so I have a form here. I've been using this form, this application, this demo application in quite a few videos in this launch tutorial series. So what if we wanted to change the color of this form to a different color whenever the application loads? All right. So this would be as simple as just using a lifecycle function on upload. This is not really a valuable use case, but it's just showing you how this works. So I'm going to go into the lifecycle function. I'm going to go to the on upload. We're going to add a function. I already have a function to set states. All right, set state value. This function is taking 2 parameters, and it's pretty much going to set these value to this field in our app data. So I'm going to call this form color, and I'm going to give it a value of gray. All right. And we're just going to put a little comment here. Change the form's background color on load. Now, things like this should not, this is a horrible use case for lifecycle functions, by the way. If one thing you need to know is that nothing is free. So lifecycle functions come with their performance hit. So you only want to use lifecycle functions when you absolutely have to, right? So you do not want to have 100 lifecycle functions because that is going to hinder your application. All right. So we have this lifecycle function here. I believe that our form is actually just a static form with a white background color. I'm going to just change this to be more dynamic. I'm going to use a function here that basically is going to point to our app data. So parameter app underscore data dot form color. All right. And I do not believe I have a form color set. So if I were to go into my application, let me just be sure. Nope, I do not have a form color. Well, actually, I do have a form color. All right, that must be from a different video. So now it's white. All right, so that's why our form is white. And whenever we load the page, it should change to whatever we set it in our lifecycle function, which is great. All right, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and save this and refresh the page. All right, there you have it. So now whenever the page loaded, our lifecycle function triggered and our form, the color of our form changed. What if we wanted to do something, let's say, somewhat different, right? Let's pull in a text block. All right. I'm just going to make it look a little pretty, put some margin to the left and some margin to the right. I kind of mixed that up, left and right, but let's roll with it. Put some margin at the top, 30 pixels. Let's connect this text block to a new app data field that we're going to call. So we have an amount. So I guess we're going to call this a calculated amount. And it's going to be, call it 0. All right. Okay, that's simple enough. We're going to copy this calculated amount and go over here and just paste it into our live app data. And I'm just going to bind this text element to our calculated app data by simply making it dynamic and pointing it to parameter dot app underscore data dot calculated amount. So there you have it, 0. I'm just going to go ahead and remove this lifecycle function for upload. All right. So we have that. I'm going to go back to my impute, or let's just do it. Let's duplicate this impute element and just change this to point to amount. Okay. We're just going to make this a non-managed data flow, and we're going to change this to a number impute. Perfect. All right. Awesome. So here's what we're going to do. Whenever this the data in whenever the amount changes, we want to multiply the amount by 5 and basically have that be reflected in our calculated amount. All right, simple, straightforward process. So I'm going to go back into my lifecycle function, and I'm going to go to data change, add a function. I'm just going to call this function sets states val. We've used this before. I'm just going to say change, or let's say multiply the amount by 5 and set to the calculated amounts field. And what we're going to listen for here is amounts. If you notice, I do not use the dot notation like app underscore data. No, because by default, this is saying the app data field to watch. So we don't need to have any prefixes. All right. So what I'm going to do here is that for my property, or the field, is going to be the calculated amounts. And then the value, we're going to use some code here, and we're just going to change that to parameter dot app underscore data the amount times 5. Multiply that by 5. All right. I'm going to add this. I'm going to save. Refresh the page. So if as you can see, well, now it's 500. If I were to, let's say, change that, you have it at 1,000. If I were to maybe put some completely random value in there. All right, so that is reflected. So I've shown you how to use this lifecycle functions, and I've given you two very horrible scenarios that you should never use. Updated change is not to be used in this way. It should be used for things that can only be done using that lifecycle function. For example, this scenario that we just did here can be done in a much more efficient way, and I'll show you. So if I just go over here to my unupdated change and I just delete this, I could go back into my text block and make it it's already a dynamic value, right? And instead of pointing it to the calculated amount, all I need to do is just do what I did in that other function, point it to the amount, and then multiply by 5. All right. And it's practically the same thing. All right. So you don't need to use a lifecycle function for that scenario. So, go out there, build your applications whenever there is something that needs to be done. And from your design, you deem it that the only way to do this is using a lifecycle function. By all means, it's there for your use. Use it, get the value from it. See you in the next video.